love it. Great. Hi, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well this evening. Thank you very much for coming to tonight's panel. Our latest panel from the Discourse Series, the University of Arizona Discourse Series. I want to say a quick thank you before we get started to our absolutely fantastic team of interns. Give them a round of applause. For those of you who are unfamiliar with who we are and what we do, we are the University of Arizona Discourse Series. We put on monthly forums to try to make sure that we're addressing issues of public concern. Our umbrella issue this year is the state of higher education. We're trying to address as many issues that concern higher education as possible. And I'm particularly excited about the one that we have tonight, because tonight we're going to be talking about an issue that affects higher education at a whole lot of different levels. It affects faculty, no matter what level you're at in the faculty. It affects our classrooms. It affects all of our wallets and our pocketbooks. So I'm really, really excited to discuss what it is that we have to discuss tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about the corporatization of the university. If you don't know what that means, you will by the end of the night. I promise you that. That said, I do want to just point out that we have some upcoming events. We're going to have the Regents Cup, which is our annual state debate tournament that's going to be happening on April 12th, Saturday, April 12th. It'll be up at NAU in Flagstaff this year. Go Cats. I hope that we're going to end up winning and doing a great job and bringing home that absolutely hideous trophy. That said, we have a great guest speaker with us here this evening. I'm so happy to have him. We have, zooming in, we have Daniel Bessner. Daniel Bessner is the Ann H. and Kenneth B. Pyle Associate Professor in American Foreign Policy in the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington. He's also the co-host of the Foreign Affairs podcast American Prestige. His writing has appeared in Harper's Magazine, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and other venues. He also appeared on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and NPR's Fresh Air. Everyone, please give a warm round of applause for Daniel Bessner. Danny, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. And go birds, is that what you said?
Go Cats, go Cats.
Go Cats. Go Cat. No, do cats kill the birds? Go Cats.
We're a very confusing school because we're the Wildcats, but we also say bear down, so no one really understands what our mascot is.
Difficult. But my cousin went to the school and she loved it, so it's a pleasure.
Excellent. Great. Yeah, she probably wouldn't love it today because it's like 115 degrees, even though it's only March. But that said, so I hope that you're doing well tonight, Danny. So usually what we do is we bring in a sort of expert speaker to lay out the issue for the audience, for anyone who's unfamiliar with what we're talking about tonight. So Danny, when you hear corporatization of the university, what does that mean to you? And can you give a brief breakdown of what that concept is for our audience?
Sure. So I think if one thinks about the university, one imagines it as a public good, at least theoretically, that the university is created not to generate profit, at least in theory, but to do research and to teach students. This was the initial logic behind the creation of large American universities in the 19th and into the 20th centuries, and to some degrees it's borrowed from Germany. The American Research University is really an importation from Germany, because in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a lot of people who studied here went to Germany and they're like, oh, we should actually do that here. We should have a place where scholars are free to research, they're free to teach, and they're free to publish. And that idea and ideal has had a lot of ups and downs, but I think that is this type of utopian vision of the American university. Of course, this transformed over the course of the 20th century. Probably the most important institutional innovation of the university, at least to my mind, was that which occurred in the middle of the 20th century, when the university, the American university as an institution, particularly elite institutions and large public universities like the University of Washington, where I teach, like the University of Arizona and elsewhere, were basically enlisted to a certain degree in the effort to fight the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And it's really in the 1950s, in the late 1950s, post-Sputnik, that the American university becomes the type of gigantic university that we know today, where the federal government is giving it a lot of money, where there is a real sense of public good, that the idea is professors will not only do research to make money, or to fulfill their narrow interests, even though that is a part of it, certainly to a degree, but that it is achieving some form of public good, for the American public that funds it through taxpayer dollars. And so the Cold War University, as it comes to be known, had several elements. It had the STEM element, which might be best known, where particularly after the Soviets again launched Sputnik, Americans were like, oh my God, we need to not let that happen again. And so the National Defense and Education Act of 1958 was passed. A lot of money was funneled into universities, but also the humanities and the social sciences themselves were enlisted in the struggle for the Cold War. You get the emergence of area studies programs. There are predecessors before the 1950s, but they really explode in the 1950s and beyond. The idea, of course, being that the United States needed to govern its global empire, and so you needed someone who spoke Tagalog, or you needed someone who spoke Vietnamese, or Mandarin Chinese, or what have you. And so this becomes the Cold War University, and it really reigns between the 1950s, 1960s, and into the 1970s. And as all good things must come to an end, or I mean, I say that somewhat ironically because the Cold War University evinces a pattern in American history, which is that we only get progressive social reform mostly when it's linked to some sort of anxiety. In the 1930s, the New Deal emerges because of fears about fascism on the right and communism on the left. In the 1950s, atomic anxieties and anxieties about the Soviet Union led to the funding of the Cold War University. And just quick tangent, one interesting thing to note is that even with the quote unquote new Cold War with China, you'll notice that the university is not being funded like it was in the first Cold War. So we could see a difference between what was going on then and what's going on now. Okay, but to get to corporatization. So there's the emergence of what has been termed, and I'm sure many people here are aware of the term, neoliberalism begins to become a governing American ideology in the 1970s. And there's a lot of reasons for this. There's a stagnation of the Fordist mid-century order of mass production, mass consumption, and mass employment. President Nixon takes the United States off the Bretton Woods system, off the gold standard, so financialization begins to take off. And there's this new ideology that deregulation and corporatization and monopolization are going to be the key to economic progress in the 1970s, 1980s, and beyond. And to some degree, I think what we're witnessing today is a move past the neoliberal era. But basically, the emergence of neoliberalism gave rise to what has been termed the neoliberal university. This is a university, and it's evident most obviously at elite institutions that are very rich, but I think it percolates throughout the entire system, where the idea of what a university is begins to move beyond the notion of research and teaching to other things. In the Cold War, it's to be in service of the state, the literal state, the national security state. And in the 70s and 80s and beyond, it's really to generate profits. So some people might have heard this joke that Harvard is a hedge fund with a university attached. And what that effectively means is that the logic of Harvard, as it transformed over the last 4 or so decades, moved away from research and teaching to making money, to increasing its endowment through real estate investments and through investments in financialized capital. And there's a lot of different things that you see in this shift, but I'd like to highlight two. If you look back at boards of regents in the mid 20th century, they're mostly composed of local elites, sure, but faculty have a certain representation. Oftentimes labor would have representation. But over the course of the second half of the 20th century, that begins to transform, and boards of regents begin to be dominated by people from private industry, and then later on people who made their money on places like Wall Street. Related to that, you get the university search for private donors. So someone like Bill Ackman, if people were paying attention to what happened at Harvard, is able to exert influence over what Harvard does because of his incredible amounts of money, and he's able to do things like fund programs or shut programs down. And this is something you see throughout the system. At Columbia University, you see it today. And I think that's a lot of the reason why Columbia has apparently caved to the demands of the Trump administration is because of fears about donors. And they kind of agree with what Trump is doing, at least to a certain degree, because they don't want to alienate donors. Something similar has happened at the University of Washington. So you basically get the influx of private capital to what is supposed to be a public good. And something else happens that in the universities from the late 1970s and really the 1980s onward is that it begins to mirror other elements of the economy. So everyone is probably well aware of Reagan and Clinton era deregulation, where essentially Reagan, Clinton, Bush and beyond effectively deregulated the American political economy, allowing for corporate consolidation and the rise of monopolies. To take an industry that I know well, Hollywood, there's basically like 5 Hollywood companies now, where there used to be many more beyond that. And so you see this private capital market logic begin to inform the American economy, and that logic begins to shape American universities. So you get the emergence of an administrator class that over the course of the last 4 decades, its growth far outstrips that of the faculty. You get tenure-line faculty, with tenure being, one of the great gifts in the American economy. I think it was Stanley Fish who called a tenured professorship in the 80s or 90s something like the last good job in America. And what he meant was that there's actual freedom, and you could actually say what you want. Obviously, everyone knows the ultimate tyrant is the workplace boss. But you begin to get a move beyond the tenured faculty and the rise of adjunct professors to the degree where today roughly 75% of university professors are off the tenure line. They're adjunct professors. They're teaching jobs for very low pay, $3, $4, $5,000 a class, unable to really make a living. So you get the pauperization of the faculty class and the rise of an administrative class, which kind of has its own capitalist logic, whereas the purpose of the administrative class is not necessarily to improve research and teaching, although that is a component of it, but it's also to basically produce what in other fora is called shareholder value, where the boards of regents are essentially viewed as shareholders, and the purpose of an administrative class is to do what they want in order to grow endowments or to increase the amount of private capital that is distributed to universities. So just to slow down, I think what we have today is a corporate university informed by neoliberal market capitalist logics that are not necessarily in service to the two utopian goals of universities, which are research on one hand and teaching on the other. So that's a bit of a potted history, but I think that's where we stand today.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And just a funny side note, the first guest speaker we ever had in the Discourse Series 5 years ago was Stanley Fish. So glad we got a nice shout out to him. So yeah, I just to break that down and to sort of like bring it back to sort of plain language for our audience here. Yeah, I mean, when I think of corporatization, and I think of sort of how it is that corporations work and trying to run a school like a corporation and a business rather than like an institution of learning, not to be too kumbaya about it, but, it would be really great if we could all just come here, critically think, just do research, stress test the establishment. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of higher education. And I think what we're constantly seeing, at least to my purview, is turning education into a product and turning students into customers, right? And the result of that is that we end up having a lot of universities that are sort of seeing students walk around with dollar signs over their heads and just and really seeing them more than anything as just like, how do we make sure that we get that person in a seat because that equals a certain amount of money? And of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that tuition has ballooned over the past few generations, right? And we don't really have the equal distribution of kind of like state funds, alumni donations, and tuition that we used to have. Tuition now takes up a huge part of that. So can you very quickly, Danny, before we get to the rest of our panel, can you kind of connect what we're talking about tonight to how much these students are unfortunately having to pay and how much debt they're going into when they end up graduating?
A very successful project happened in the mid 20th century United States linked to the GI Bill, which essentially made American universities mass universities for the first time in American history. Before the post World War II era, really before the 1950s, most Americans didn't attend university. You were able to, in the Fordist political economy of the mid 20th century, earn a pretty good living with just a high school diploma. I'm coming to you from Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. And if you talk to loggers who first got going in the 1960s and 1970s, they were able to live upper middle class lives with high school diplomas or even without high school diplomas. And this begins to change over the course of the second half of the 20th century, where universities basically become reimagined as credentialing mechanisms for the emergent professional managerial class, a class that is not quite labor. It's not quite the owners of capital, but it's basically people who exist in an in-between space that manage capital for other groups. And the university becomes the primary credentializing mechanism for to enter that class in a genuine way. So what universities were able to do is that they were able to increase tuition because the notion was that if you didn't go to a university, you were not going to be able to live a middle class lifestyle, particularly after the 1970s and beyond, when the neoliberal economy I was talking about basically destroys American labor and destroys the American manufacturing base. Um, so this explosion in tuition goes along with the explosion in the administrative class, the emergence of student debt as a genuine problem, where I'm sure many people in this room have student debt, and many people I know have student debt that they're going to pay off until essentially they die, because Congress said that it couldn't be pushed off in bankruptcy. But all of that is allowed to happen because the university occupies a very specific place within the capitalist political economy as a credentialing mechanism for the bureaucrats and manipulators of capital. And so that, again, is very different from what the university was in theory supposed to be about research and teaching. So grades become linked to things like jobs. Going to college becomes linked to a thing like a job. And I would imagine if we asked many people in the room, how do they envision what they're doing in college? Probably the top thing, and if not the top thing, one of the top three things that they would say is to get a job. That the type of job that I want to see live, the type of middle class, upper middle class, or if God shines down on you, rich life that I want to lead is only going to be possible if I go to college. And so that's connected to everything you're talking about, Ted, the rise of student loans, the explosion of tuition. And I think one of the reasons that the Trump administration has been able to attack universities so successfully is that they've obviously become not so good of a return on investment for many people. That many people have gone into life changing, really crippling debt that they're never going to pay off because they took out $200,000 in loans. And with the decline of the job market, due to, again, the hyper-capitalist neoliberal era, universities aren't seen as a good return on investment any longer. And so there's a large public resentment against universities. Many people who attended them, and for people who don't attend them, they're basically viewed as liberal bastions of people who look down upon working class Americans. So I think that corporatization is part of this larger process, and it really has served to delegitimize the university in the minds of many Americans today. And the university, the Department of Education, are now soft targets for that reason for people who want to dismantle and destroy them because they aren't primarily about research and teaching. They are about reproducing elites and making money.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, universities are particularly vulnerable to a sort of mythology in the public mindset because universities, they're weird, man. I mean, like these are really weird places that really kind of don't are not supposed to function like anywhere else, and so it's hard to be able to sort of explain what it is that goes on at a university to people outside. So let's do that. Let's bring in our panel. Danny, thank you so much for agreeing to stay for the entire time. Hopefully, can you see us? If I sit over here, can you see the panel? Great. Excellent. Okay, we're going to bring in the rest of our panel now, and the rest of our panel are all faculty members at the University of Arizona right here. So we're going to bring in each of our panelists are going to give a quick opening statement about who they are and why they're here and how they view this particular subject. Natalia Apanovich, right? Natalia Panovich is a career track lecturer in the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning. She earned her PhD in Sustainable Agriculture and Biorenewable Resources and Technology from Iowa State University in 2018. Since then, she's been teaching sustainability-focused courses and conducting research on smallholder farming systems, circular economy, ecotechnology, and sustainable development. Please put your hands together for Natalia Panovich.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me for this event. I feel like I'm not qualified to be here. I haven't been here long enough to have the experiences that my colleagues here have here, but I will speak a little bit about the structure, the faculty structure within this university. I'm not sure if all of you are aware about the stratification of faculty rankings, and we have over, I think, 200 different names for faculty positions at this university. So we have tenure track, tenured faculty at the top. These are the best jobs, best paid, the most benefits, and then under that we have career track, people like me, lecturers, professors of practice, professors of research, and under that we have adjuncts and visiting professors. So those bottom two categories, we call them contingent faculty here. Here at the University of Arizona, 39% of all faculty are tenure track, tenured faculty, which is quite representative of what Daniel was talking about. Recently, we had a survey that was done on all, I think it was only on career track faculty. So this is lecturers and professors of practice and research, because we've been speaking up about our working conditions, and the faculty senate decided to do a survey on the faculty to see what's going on. So I'll just gonna briefly mention some of the major points. So only 14% of all surveyed faculty said that they have high job satisfaction. 14%. Over half said that they looked for employment elsewhere. 1/3 have another job, at least one, to support themselves in addition to having a full-time job here. 60% said that they worry about their job security because these jobs, most of them are year-to-year contract, and if you're lucky, you'll get a 3-year contract. And number one issue is salary. So why there are so many career track faculty here? I think Daniel already discussed that. It's cheap and it's flexible. They can fire, hire at will. So how does it connect to you guys? So our working conditions are your learning conditions. From this survey, we can see that we're overstressed, overworked, and underpaid. And obviously, that's going to be reflected in the quality and amount of time that we spend with you. And that, in return, compromises your chances to be successful after you graduate from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Next, we have John LaGuardia, who is a career track lecturer in the writing program at the University of Arizona. He earned his PhD in English from U of A in 2019 and has been teaching academic writing since 2006.
Hey, everybody. Should I use this microphone, or if I project it? Okay, how's this? Okay. So I am a career track faculty in the writing program, and I thought one of the things I could do today is try to put a little bit of personal context to the things that Natalia just gave us as an overview. So I think one of the things I want to say to start is just to emphasize that one of the reasons that I'm here, and I suspect that a lot of the reasons that the rest of us are here as well, is that we very deeply care about this stuff. So I think I and a lot of us are going to say some pretty negative things here today. These are aspects of our job and changes in the university environment that we're all very frustrated with, and we would like to see moving in a more positive direction. So we are in some ways kind of exposing ourselves because of our dedication to the belief in education as sort of primary basic right of individuals in the United States. So I am a member of the writing program, career track faculty there. We are one of the largest programs at U of A. We have, at last count, about 136 27 instructors, split into career track lecturers, which are maybe a little over half of that, graduate students, and also professors of practice. So the career track lecturers are the largest cohort there. We teach roughly 8,000 students every year through our first year writing courses, doing things like building foundations in communication and writing. But I would say more importantly than just the communication aspect of writing is building rhetorical awareness, building skills of analysis, and also critical thinking skills. Thinking about writing as a way that we make sense of the world rather than writing as just a simple mode of communication, which AI does for us now, right? So our working conditions have gotten worse, I would say, in recent years. This is came up in the Faculty Senate report, the survey that Natalia just described. This was just last month, the 10-year anniversary of the National Adjunct Walkout Day. This was a day that a large group of us across the nation got together and walked out of our classes and demonstrated on the main mall to try to improve our working conditions and the quality of education we were able to offer. And there were some real successes there. We gained higher salaries. We got year-long and even multi-year contracts with an expectation of renewal of those contracts. We gained health and retirement benefits from the adjunct status, which does not come with those things. And we got a greater role in curriculum and policy through voting rights and through service that we do both to the department and also more widely in the university. So this was around the time that the career track model was developed at U of A, right around 2016 or so. This model started being developed. And in the midst of this, we ended up going from a course cap of 19 students per class to a course cap of 25 students per class, which is quite a lot of quite a lot more students. We basically went from teaching 4 classes of 19 students to 4 classes of 25, which if you're quick with math is about a whole other class worth of students with no additional compensation. The Associated Departments of English, just to give you a little context there, recommends about 15 students per class in a writing class. So we're at 25 currently. An instructor is recommended to work with no more than 60 students at one time. I'm currently working with 125, which is quite a lot more than that. If you're quick with the math of it, teaching 225 over the course of the school year. So one of the effects of this has been that a lot of the interactions in my classroom, and I'm sure in classrooms as you guys have experienced them as well, have started to become more transactional, less transformational, less personal, less dedicated to things like critical thinking and the engagement of thought, and more like you are paying me money, now here's your service. I have accepted your tuition dollars, here's your grade. You have given me a project, here is my rubric, check marks for that project. And much less of a personal sort of community development. Commenting on student writing all of a sudden turns from comments that thoughtfully engage with student ideas, in addition to elements of their writing craft, to a mechanical copying, pasting from a bank of pre-written comments, or even worse for me, check marks on a rubric. In the context of all of this, we have been threatened with layoffs every single year. When those layoffs happen, all that really means is that the people who are laid off lose their health insurance for the summer. That we pay for it through the year, but then it's taken away, and that money is refunded to the individual that's laid off. And a lot of times they're brought back as adjuncts, so brought back at that lower status. Wages have been a real problem too. We work, although we're in a more stable job than adjuncts are, we still make roughly half the salary of tenure track employees, but we generate more student credit hours. So the student, something that Daniel Bessner said, was this idea of starting to look at student tuition dollars as income for the university. And all of a sudden, when you're thinking about tuition dollars as income, you can't lower tuition when you want to see greater levels of profit. So we end up generating more student credit hours, so we end up being a greater greater source of revenue for the university than tenure track folks. And I think I've way run over my time now, so I'll just conclude now by saying that going back to the theme of today, the corporatization of the university, I want to echo something that Daniel Bessner said in the redefinition of the purposes of education, moving from what I believe is the development of an educated citizenry capable of participating in democratic governance to generating profits and churning out trained workers, from producing skills and to producing skills and work disciplined workers, from increasing quality of life to increasing work output, from contemplation and consideration to production. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Blossom, you got to just open up the window. There you go. Just set him right there. All right, and our last panelist, before we get into our Q&A and going back and forth, is Natalie Reed. Natalie Reed is a senior lecturer for the writing program at the University of Arizona and a member of the Wildcat Writers Advisory Board. She earned her MA in Applied Linguistics from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Since 1999, she has been teaching academic composition and English language composition.
All right, thank you. So we've heard from our guest speaker, Daniel Bessner, my colleagues, John and Natalia, about the corporate university on a national scale and what it means to be employed as a contingent faculty member at a public higher ed institution like the University of Arizona. Now I'd like to share one path toward solutions, and that is active participation in our union, United Campus Workers Arizona, also known as UCWAZ. UCWAZ represents all students, faculty, and staff who work at all three public universities in Arizona, ASU, NAU, and UA. I'll start by addressing some misconceptions about unions, why people join, and what it means to be a member of a union. A union is a collective effort by all employees who work for an employer to create safer, more equitable workplaces and to prevent management from treating workers poorly. For contingent faculty, our campaigns have focused on job security, paths to promotion, fair workloads, and thriving wages. Why do we join? The stereotype is that union members hate their workplaces. In fact, we join because we care. We do care about our work. Specifically, we care deeply about our students, learning and knowledge, our labor, and about each other as workers. And Natalia, I'll repeat what you said, our working conditions are our students' learning conditions. For example, when contingent faculty do not have job security, there are not enough instructors to teach foundations courses, and students lose support from their faculty mentors. When contingent faculty workloads and class sizes are increased, students are cheated out of individual attention and real thoughtful feedback. These are just a few of the ways that corporatization of the university undermines students' educational experiences and reasons why we join our union. Above all, we value public education, and we are here in solidarity with our local communities, our campus communities, to sustain the common good. Thank you.
Well said, Natalie. Thank you. And that's recording, right, Blossom? Okay, great. All right, great. So I want to just touch on something. And again, those of you who are in our audience who are students, let's bring it back home to you, and let's bring it to our panel. And Daniel, I'll start with you just to find out whether this is happening at UW as well. You guys have all sort of touched on different ways that this is affecting our classrooms. For those of you who are sitting here and have ever sat in a classroom and thought, man, this really sucks. This is really, really kind of boring. Like, why is it that I even have to take this, this gen ed class or whatever? Some of the ways that this is obviously affecting, I mean, Danny touched on it before when he was saying that grades get linked to salaries, right? And so that obviously infects your relationship with your professors because you see them as sort of gatekeepers of your future paycheck rather than as, people who you should be collaborating with to just think interestingly about the world, right? Talking about AI before, I mean, it's very true that I think a lot of times we've been prompted to go, why don't you just use technology more in your classrooms? Just have AI teach whatever it is that you need to teach, and then it'll be totally fine. And we sort of turn these things into diploma mills, and certainly increasing both class sizes and also the amount of classes that professors are teaching. I mean, anyone who's ever been in a classroom knows the smaller the class size, the more intimate the relationship you end up having with the professor is, and therefore the more personal attention you can get, and therefore the better the education, right? So the more that we just sort of shove as many students into as many classrooms or as many teaching loads as possible, the worse that the end result ends up being, right? So we certainly see that, I think, happening a lot at UA. So Daniel, let me bring that to you. Do you see that happening at UW as well? And then we'll kind of bring it to our panel.
Yes, I see it happening at UW because it can't not happen, because the financial investment in college is oftentimes so large and devastating for people, that they need to get a return on investment. It's a requirement of doing it. So that naturally totally transforms the relationship between the student and the teacher, where the teacher, the professor, becomes essentially a gate between the student and their credential. That is in theory, but I think is very clear at this point, not in actuality, a stepping stone to a stable life, basically, a stable financial life. And it ultimately, to my mind, just reflects the perverse incentives that are engendered by a hyper-capitalist order, in which profit and work wind up being the most important organizing principles of life. That will naturally degrade what a university is supposed to do in its best instance. And what it did do for a time for certain amounts of people, not every person or person of every race or gender or sexuality or sexual identity was invited into it. But for a large mass of people, it did actually educate, and it did actually serve as a genuine stepping stone. So there's a lot of the contradictions of capitalism that one sees in the university itself. And so ultimately, to my mind, and then I'll stop, you can't just reform the university. It's part of a larger social system and social structure and a political economy. And if you want to change the university's role in that political economy, you got to actually change the political economy. Everything else will be a band-aid. Everything else will be a solve, and it's not actually going to work. What you can do at the university is join a union, which has not worked at the University of Washington, though I wish it did, because that is really the only way to affirm your voice in the contemporary American workplace. But I think we all should have an interest in actually changing the type of world in which we live.
Thank you, Danny. And to John's point about exposing ourselves before, I will say anything that Danny or I say is in no way reflective of the opinions of the rest of the panel, just in case we say anything that pisses you off or that gets anybody in trouble.
Ted, I speak on behalf of humanity, actually. So
let me bring that back to the panel over here. I mean, again, how do you see this affecting the actual quality of education in your classrooms and your relationships with your students here at UA, where, I don't know if people know, but we do have a bit of a financial crisis. Not that it's been publicized at all or anything.
I'll say a few things. I don't have much to say, but I teach, I'm not sure, maybe half of my courses are online. I teach like a bazillion courses, and they all have an online section. And I also teach micro-campus. So I think that's another thing, is we have international micro-campuses. And there is nothing personable about that. Most of the time, I have no clue who my students are. I don't see them. And we just keep dumping them in our online sections.
Yeah, can I get a show of hands? Who's ever taken an online course at the U of A? I probably don't need to tell you to keep your hands up when I ask you how many people did not feel like you had a real connection with anybody who was in the course when you're in that class. Oh, interesting. How funny. Does John, Dali, do you also see similar sort of ways that this infects your relationships with your classrooms?
Yeah, differently. I think what John said earlier about not being able to give people the kind of feedback they deserve. I mean, our purpose is to help people develop their writing. And I don't want to set up an adversarial relationship with my students, but I need to say right at the beginning, I don't want to grade AI. I'm not here to read AI. I'm here to read your writing, wherever it is. And to build that trust with my students is so hard because people are expecting me to be punitive if they, don't turn in something that has the right number of words or has grammar in development. So out of that fear and out of the time crunch of taking 19 credits, people give me AI, and it's completely depressing.
Yeah, I'll add a little piece here too. This is a really difficult question, Ted. I think there are so many different areas of my experience as a teacher and as a university employee that are affected by the circumstances that you're talking about. The financial crisis is one of those big things that I'm going to say something maybe kind of controversial now. I don't think the financial crisis was related to academics. This was a thing that you guys have maybe seen the news that the athletics department actually was bailed out by academics by your tuition dollars. They gave, do you guys know the numbers? $50 million, something like that. What is it? $100 million from academics transferred over to athletics to keep it afloat. And then we were the ones who were told that we needed to start teaching more students, working higher workloads, having a different workload distribution so that we would be more replaceable as instructors, all of that sort of stuff. And so to me, that is a very sort of distant thing that ends up having a very personal impact on my ability to teach my classes the way that I would like to teach them in the way that I think students would, students deserve. And one last thing that I'll add, I read a news story a while ago that really, I thought it was really funny at the time, and then it ended up really shaking me later. The story was about the business model for gyms, and the article referenced Planet Fitness. I don't know if you guys know Planet Fitness. Any one given location from Planet Fitness, this article said, will sign up up to about 6,500 people, so 6,500 people, when they're only able to service about 300 people at a time. And I thought it was hilarious at first, and then I started looking out at my classes and realizing how many absences I had on any given class. How many students would email me in the last week of class saying, "Hey, I'm sorry I haven't attended at all. I wonder if I can finish all the assignments for the entire year now." And I thought, oh my God, is this a business model actually? And I, not saying that it is, but also wondering,
No, I think that's totally fair. And for those of you who want to know more about the financial crisis at the U of A, please check out our podcast, No Need to Argue, where the latest episode is asking where the hell all the money went. I want to ask one last question. Daniel, I'll bring you in again here, and then I want to throw some questions, get some questions from the audience if we have any. Let's talk a little bit about the administration and how it is that they sort of enter into this. We've talked a little bit about sort of government funding. We've talked certainly about faculty and students. So how does admin kind of enter into this? Danny, you mentioned before that we have a lot more administrators than we do faculty members, and that certainly has been a shift over the past few generations, that it wasn't necessarily the case that they were so outnumbered. So why is it important to not necessarily kind of bloat up the amount of administrators who are kind of running the university, and why is it important to make sure that students and faculty are very much sort of in that together to be able to fight the good fight?
It depends what one thinks the purpose of the university is. If one imagines that the university is a bureaucratic institution that is supposed to reproduce its own bureaucracies over time, then it's a good thing that the administrative class has exploded. If one imagines that the university is supposed to deal with private donors and get as much money as possible in order to build new gyms, new dormitories to provide really good food, then it's good that the administrative class has exploded. But if one thinks that, again, at least in theory, the purpose of a university is to research and provide a quality education to its students, then we should be concerned about the decline of faculty governance, the decline of the tenure track, the emergence of adjunctships, the emergence of non-tenured faculty as being the norm, which doesn't necessarily need to come at the expense of administrators, but it just has, because the logic of the system pushes in one direction, that is the rise of administrators, and not in the other direction, which is in the purpose of faculty. And again, I don't think you could separate the university from a larger social system. I think we've witnessed elsewhere the decline of labor power, with the replacement of the Fordist political economy with the neoliberal political economy. Basically, the replacement of mass industrial society. People go to factories with the rise of finance and the decline of blue collar work. And AI was just mentioned. That's just deindustrialization coming for the white collar workers. And then just to leave people with a little bit, I think a lot of our social problems emerge from the fact that there's this thing called the falling rate of profit, which just means that it's more difficult to make money as capitalist society goes over time. And so a lot of these cost saving measures that you see, like artificial intelligence, actually degrade the purpose of the human mind. But the reason that so many people are invested in it is because you need to make profits in our system. So again, none of this is going to change unless the system itself is reformed and transformed. We could put band-aids on the university, but this is really important, what happens at the university, because it is reflective of the larger society. And it often happens earlier in the university, and you could see it a bit clearer, but that's really, I think, what we're all talking about.
Great. Let's perform the shit out of it. Let's get in this together, guys. Anybody else on the panel want to comment? This is obviously the slightly more dangerous territory, talking about administration. So feel free to say no comment or plead the fifth. But if anybody wants to chime in before we get to audience questions, great. Yeah, let's get some questions from the audience. You could just see the sweat and fear in the room. Yeah, great. Please.
Yeah, hey, I'm Jeremy. I'm a graduate student at the law school. I'm in my last semester. I'm also a proud United Campus Workers Arizona member. I'm in student leadership at U of A. Happy to shit on the administration who put us in this position. I have one sort of comment to John's initial thing, and then a question for the panel and for Danny, who I'm a big fan of yours, Danny. So, John, you mentioned the discussion about the model for Planet Fitness. And I think one of the things that a lot of students probably don't know about is the university acquired this thing called the UA Global Campus, which was a predatory institution that targeted veterans and had, I think, a graduation rate of like 13%. It was an online university that would use like scam marketing to get as many students as possible in and graduate the least amount possible. It went bankrupt. The California Attorney General's office sued for fraud, and the Department of Education is now suing the university for fraud over this decision. Part of what's happened is the administration very much did it out of a desire to gain more clients, gain more profit. And in 2020, the Board of Regents, which importantly, only one of those 8 regents is an educator. They're all business owners or capitalists in the broad sense, approved this deal, even though it literally cost the university $1 to buy it because it was such a horrible asset. And now we have $70 million in potential lawsuits and all these other things. So when you mentioned the Planet Fitness model, I wanted to be very clear to everybody that you're in the Equinox plan here. There's a lot of people who are in the Planet Fitness model, which fucking sucks. So my question, though, I'm a labor lawyer, so I care very deeply about these things. Why is a labor union important? Like, why can't I just go to my boss and say, hey, like,
you're kind of running me ragged. Like, I want, some time off. I want, to hang out with my kids. I want to do all this. I thought, like, if I went to college and got a PMC job, I would be able to have all of these benefits that I was promised and not have to be, blue collar and, work to the bone.
Let's throw that to Natalie first, since just...
Well, a lot of times people have good relationships with their bosses, and certain bosses would respond to that very, positively and say, well, yeah, of course, you're a great worker and I'm happy to give you a day off, no problem. But that's not something that's equitable, and that's not something that would be distributed across all units and all departments. So one of the things that a labor union does is make it a collective effort. And with a collective voice of the employees who are members of the union, then we say to the boss, everyone needs to have these conditions in order to be treated fairly and not run ragged, as Jeremy described. So that's one tiny piece of the answer.
Danny, you had mentioned that there were unsuccessful efforts to form a union at UW. Do you want to just give us a little peek behind the curtain very quickly, if you want to?
Yeah, so it actually happened a bit before my time, but my understanding was that it was a classic story of the STEM and medical school, which are forced to bargain together, basically didn't want to join a union. But I think that that's actually been changing because, they come for the humanities first, but don't worry, they're coming for you next, as the example of Columbia demonstrates. And I think one thing that I always say is that socialists always understand that the boss is ultimately not your friend, regardless of what they say. It's just the nature of the relationship. They can't be your friend. In the final analysis, they'll always betray and fire you. And so this is just the reality of the economic relationship that we've created in this country. It is not a happy reality. It is not a good reality, but is the one that we have. And the only protection that workers have, the very limited protections that we have in this country, are organized around unions. And hopefully the NLRB will become stronger. Hopefully there'll be even new legislation to replace the ones from the 30s and onward to actually strengthen labor unions. But it really is the only hope that we have. And at this point, it's really just trying to get the boot off of labor's neck. We're not even asking for any sort of revolutionary transformation. So unions are one of the most important institutions in society. They've been in decline for decades. And one of the things that we could hope for going forward is that the Democratic Party, with enough pushing, will actually create an environment that's just less hostile to union organization, though, frankly, I'm not holding my breath.
Well said. John, Natalia, do you want to weigh in, or do we want to go to get another audience question here? Great. More audience questions? Yeah, great. Belle.
I have a few. I think the financial crisis at this university specifically left me feeling incredibly baffled, confused maybe. And after doing my own independent research and seeing names like the Koch brothers and finding out all of this other information about how, an R1 research university tabs on, an extra 25% to those grants that our science departments are asking for in writing, and just understanding that we're getting so much money and not understanding where that's actually going. My question is, how, as an entire community, can we lobby for more transparency from people in charge?
Yeah, how can we lobby for more transparency from people in charge in case we need to get that picked up on the video? How should we lobby to get more transparency, other than events like this where we're trying to get people to be even aware of it in the first place, to demand that kind of transparency, which would be my first answer, is just to try and make sure that people even know what's going on behind the scenes. Because I think probably as students, you're just going, yeah, man, tuition's high, that sucks. And I don't really know why, but that's just sort of the way it is. And I guess I sort of have to deal with that. How might we sort of lobby for more transparency, Natalia?
Yeah, I think it's just the whole system needs to be reworked. It is too complex. I've been here for 3 years and I'm still baffled with how the system works. I still don't know everything about the system. That's why I feel a little bit unqualified to be here, because I just don't know how the system works, because it's so huge. And if I don't know how it works, I can't advocate for changes, because I just don't know what they are. I totally agree with everything that Danny has been saying, that it is not our university's problem, it's the societal problem. Like, the whole society needs to change the way it operates.
Well said. John? Natalie?
Can you guess what I'm going to say? Okay, so like step one, there's a sticker on your seat that has a QR code to join our union. We represent all students, faculty, and staff. And one of the campaigns that UCW has done consistently is to go to the Arizona Board of Regents meetings and speak up. And we pack that room. Last time when ABOR was here at the UA campus, we turned a half-hour public comment moment into an hour, because we just had person after person speaking on behalf of students, faculty, and staff and saying, where's the money? And how should you be running these universities differently? How should you be funding public higher ed? How should you be fulfilling your mission as a land-grant university? So there are many, many ways to get educated, even though it is incredibly baffling. We don't actually have to understand what dumb things they did. We just need to tell them, you need to do it differently and better. And, here are the people that need the attention.
I also feel like one of the problems, and Danny, you can certainly sort of weigh in on this, because this is how one of the reasons why I first reached out to you is that our public conversations about the controversies that happen at universities are really kind of narrow and limited and kind of misdirected. They're very often about like, students are too damn woke and blah blah blah, and it's just such a bullshit sort of talking point. And it's really, really not what the largest issue is. And the largest issue really is more stuff like this, right? Really stuff that actually impacts, again, people's day-to-day lives at the university, what's happening in their classrooms, what's happening with after they graduate, and how much they have to pay. So, Dan, I'd love to hear from you. How is it that you feel like that we can change that narrative, that we can stop having our conversations, our public debates about universities outside of the university walls, that we can kind of just stop making that the talking point and start making this the talking point and start sort of redirecting people's focus?
It's a problem because the rich elites would rather talk about culture war bullshit than not. And so the real question is how you're going to get people who dominate the media and political spheres to care about the real issue of the university. Because in effect, a lot of the culture war discussion, and I just want to emphasize, I'm not including things like trans rights. That's not culture war. That's civil liberties and fundamental right issues. But I'm talking about Oberlin Oberlin students protesting whatever food nonsense, getting coverage on Fox News and other mainstream CNN for months. That's the type of cultural bullshit. I mean, and the problem is that what you're really asking is how do we make the elite not the elite? Because what they don't want to talk about is redistributing their money. Whether we're talking about the Republican Party or whether we're talking about the Democratic Party, they don't want to talk about actual economic transformation. So they're going to talk about culture war stuff that is hopefully going to spark outrage in their aging senescent viewership and their media programs that are dying anyway. So it's a real big problem because I don't see that conversation ever really changing, because it would have to change in a way that would force people who benefit from the system to begin to actually question the system itself. So I think that maybe that is just no longer real terrain of necessary struggle, that you could let the Fox News viewer or whatever, what's the wackier one now? The Newsmax. Yeah, or CNN, frankly, or MSNBC viewer do what they're going to do and really try to organize in a meaningful way to actually identify the real pressure points in the system. Because at some point, the conversation is not going to actually change anything. And we have to reject the Habermasian liberal idea that rational exchange is the key to political exchange, because I think the history of the last 40 years suggests that it just isn't the case. Think about all the protests against the Iraq War. They did absolutely nothing because those weren't actual pressure points of power. So the first thing to do would be to actually think strategically and think about where the actual pressure points are and organize and attack those directly.
Please, John.
Yeah, great. I agree with so much of that. I want to just add a couple of very, very small things. I want to echo Natalie's invitation to join your union, UCWAZ. Follow their Instagram page, UCWAZ. There's lots of local news tidbits that show up in the Instagram page that are easily digestible. You don't need to sit through a 3-hour meeting in order to understand the gist of it. There are already, though, some aspects of the University of Arizona administration that are public. ABOR meetings, the Arizona Board of Regents, this is the governing body for all 3 of the major universities in Arizona, Northern Arizona University, Arizona State, and University of Arizona. Those meetings are all public and live streamed. At least the main, the main meetings are. They have private meetings as well, but the main meetings are streamed. So if you're interested in this stuff, you can watch those. ABOR meetings are streamed. The Faculty Senate meetings, this is our shared governance body here. They are also live streamed. So if you're interested in seeing what faculty are actually talking about, you could totally get on their Faculty Senate website and check out the live streams of those. But I think maybe even more digestible than all those things are local news sources. I think, Daniel Bessner was talking about some of the national news sources that all of us are familiar with and maybe very frustrated with, very overwhelmed with. I certainly read and watch enough. I certainly read and watch enough national news to feel like heart palpitations at night as I'm trying to go to sleep. But local news does a really great job of digesting some of these things at the local level that are more difficult to understand or time-consuming to understand. So if you're feeling like you don't have time to go to a Faculty Senate meeting or an ABOR meeting, maybe read an article from the Arizona Daily Star or Arizona Luminaria or the Arizona the Sentinel. These are all local news sources that help to sort of digest these things for you and put them into more accessible quicker terms.
Thank you, John. We're right about at 8 o'clock, and we are just about at the end of our Zoom call with Danny. So does anybody else here on the panel have a one-sentence parting shot that they want to take? Anything else that you guys want to say? Because I certainly have mine, Natalia.
Yes. Thank you for having me today. I just want to tell you guys to talk to each other, express your opinions with each other, and talk to your professors about anything.
Oh, perfect. Well said. I almost want to just end it there because that's the perfect note to end it on. Great. Danny, anything you want to say before you leave?
Don't lose hope, but think strategically.
Oh, man, what concise people. This is great. So before we leave, I just want to remind everybody that you can follow the University of Arizona Discourse Series on Twitter. Yes, Twitter, not X. You can follow it there. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on TikTok, where we have absolutely fantastic videos all the time. I want to say happy birthday to Logan. I also want to say thank you again to our excellent interns, if we can get a round of applause for them. And let's one last time thank our guests, our panel here, Natalia Apanovich, John LaGuardia, Natalie Reed, Daniel Bessner, and again, all of you, thank you very much for coming tonight. We appreciate it.